Welcome to Wealth Made Simple with Shaz, where you'll learn how to master your money through business, property and tax-saving strategies. Your host has collectively helped his clients make tens of millions of pounds in additional profits through these strategic approaches to business. Introducing Shaz Nawaz, an award-winning chartered accountant, property tax expert, entrepreneur and property investor.
So, Kieran, what's been happening in the property world since last week?
There's been in terms of what we've been doing, or
what we've been doing, that's what people want to hear to start off with.
What we've been doing is we've been looking at different property strategies that we can potentially implement to grow a larger property portfolio, and how the different strategies work and how they might work with each other in synchronization or separately on their own, depending on what we're doing. So you mean there's
more than one way to buy property? Because the average person on the street, let's just say, probably assumes, and the conversation I've had with people, I'm sure you have had too, that they see a property, they buy it either to live in for themselves as their home, or they buy a second or additional property, which is called a single buy-to-let usually, and people live in there. Some who are more sophisticated might have come across HMO, a house in multiple occupation, whether you got more than one person in one room that's rented out. But
absolutely,
that's about it in property, isn't it?
Yeah. A lot of people do believe that there's ultimately, like you say, two.
Unless you're talking about commercial property, then obviously you've got commercial, but purely you're talking about residential.
For residential, most people are on the understanding that there's essentially two things you can do. You can either buy to own or buy to let, and that's about where research stops in general. But I've been looking at this week 16 different strategies that you could potentially implement. So
plenty to go at. And
so
we probably won't get through all.
We're definitely not going to get through all 16.
At the start, we had a slight technical glitch. We're behind by a few minutes, so we do apologise for that. But we'll obviously try and get through all the content we have planned for today.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, overall, property is one of the world's most popular investment categories.
What do you think that is?
I think it's down to the stability and the reliable returns that you can get on your investment when investing in property. And by and large, big markets like the UK, like America, like Canada, have large value in terms of their property markets, and their property markets have got a historic proof of growth and proof of return on investment. So they're very strong. What's the word I'm looking for?
Market trends and history, and people can kind of track their returns. And I know it's a well-trodden, well-known marketplace.
Marketplace, that's the word I was looking for. I knew there was a reason you were here with me.
That's to read your mind every time you forget a word.
Absolutely. So yeah, and at its very simplest and very basic level, you could distill every strategy down into, it falls into the umbrella category of buy to rent, buy to let, or buy to own. But when you actually delve a little bit deeper beneath the surface, you do get into a vast array of different strategies. Like I say, I've looked at 16 this week, and that's 16 that I'm aware of. There are many more others that I'm not aware of, and I recognise that, and I recognise that you don't know what you don't know.
Well, 16 is a good number to start with for most of our listeners and viewers tonight. Obviously, we won't get through all 16 because we want to make sure we do justice to the different strategies, and at the same time share enough information and detail with people. So let's start with a traditional buy-to-let.
Yes.
If someone's looking to buy a buy-to-let property, let's say they own their own home, for example, and they want to buy a second or additional property, whether that's to move into or whether that's going to be a buy-to-let, because sometimes people move into a bigger home usually, or and then most upgrade, but some may downgrade, by the way, depending on the circumstances, or somebody's happy in their current home with their family and they're looking to buy a single-let property. Where do they start? How does it work? What are the things that they need to look out for? What are the pros and cons that you know?
So single-let properties. They're generally where a lot of people start, like you say, or if you are upgrading your house, but you've got enough of a financial backing to keep the house that you're currently in and then rent it out on a long-term basis, it's one of the least risky strategies out there as an overall thing. It's in terms of
anything, or just in terms of property.
In terms of property.
Okay. Yeah.
That's because the demand levels for rental properties are usually quite high in most areas within the UK, because it's been getting increasingly harder over the years to get on the property market. So a lot of people are left renting, whether that's through choice or whether that's through necessity.
So without getting into the politics of it, is what you're saying is house prices have been increasing.
Yep.
From an investor's point of view, and salaries haven't been increasing in line with that. So when somebody's looking to buy a home or a buy-to-let property, for example, where they need to put down, let's say, at least a 25% deposit.
At least a 25%
they haven't
deposit.
got that.
Yeah.
Let's forget their own home, because that's a different ball game, and we're here to talk about property investment as opposed to buying your own home. Although I think we should maybe just do a show on just buying your own home for people who want to get on the property ladder, in terms of some of the things they could do that we've seen people do, which are creative and inventive and different. But for today, let's stick to
we'll cover that another time.
So somebody needs to save a 25% deposit to buy a buy-to-let at least.
To buy a buy-to-let.
SDLT, if it's got SDLT, legal costs, compliance, due diligence, all that on top.
Yeah, on top of that. And little things that people don't realise at the outset for property investment is things like you say, SDLT. We'll take that as
stamp duty, land tax. Yeah.
Prime example is when you buy your own home, you pay SDLT. People are aware of that. People know about it, and they'll let the solicitors and the experts work out how much they're going to pay for it and all the rest of that. But with investment property, it's good to be aware that there's an additional 3%.
On the whole lot.
On the whole lot, yeah, which a lot of people don't realise. So when they're looking at calculating these things and looking at whether or not it's affordable or whether or not they want to get into it, it's something to be aware of. That's an additional cost that you may not have realised.
And you've got to pay up front when you complete it, pretty much.
Yep.
I mean, you got a few days to pay it, but it's not many days.
Yeah, the SCLT will always get paid.
Yeah.
But yeah, in terms to...
So you've got to have that cash flow as well on top of everything else.
On top of everything else, yeah. And it like I say, it's something good to be aware of that a lot of people...
So someone who hasn't bought property, for example, wants to buy or hasn't ever bought a buy-to-let property.
Yep.
And wants to buy a property, they see one on the market, whether it's through an agent, auction, deal sourcer, and we'll cover all those things in due course. And what are the next steps for them?
So once you've put your offer in, it's been accepted, and all the rest of that, it depends on whether you're buying for cash or whether you're going through a mortgage process. Like say, if you're going through a mortgage process, a minimum of 25% for buy-to-let generally, and then it depends on what sort of mortgage product. I'm not going to go into different mortgage products because I'm not. It's not
our bag, yeah.
No, that's not my professionalism. So you've got to decide on which one best suits you and best suits your circumstances, and there are many good professionals out there that will help you identify those products. Then work out how much your monthly payment is going to be. Then it's work backwards from that much. How much do I need to charge for the rent? How much do I need to cover? And it's not just about covering the rent. Something that, as a back of a napkin sort of calculation, people go, oh, well, the rent's going to be, for example, £1,000. My costs are going to be, in repayments, £500. So I'm going to make £500. Well, no, you're not. That's not where you start, because you've got other fees and other insurances and things like that to take into account. Repairs, maintenance.
If you're a letting agent, will come on to second. You've got to pay them. Yeah. And then the property might be empty, so you've got a void period.
So you've got to cover that as well, and then you've got to cover. Yeah.
And if someone can't pay your rent for 2 or 3 months of a particular situation, you've got to have the cash flow to pay, because your mortgage lender's not going to say, oh, well, you take a 3-month repayment holiday because your tenant's not paid you. Well, no, this is a business. So
it's a business. You've got to make sure you've got cash flow for it. And so suddenly that £500 that you thought you were making is now £50. Is that a sound investment? Well, for me personally, I would say no. I don't want to be making just £50 a month off of a property that's cost me probably £200,000. That to me is not a good return on investment. But if you're just getting started, at least you're making a profit. But
let's cover this right now without my other hat of local politician, by the way.
Yeah.
Because let's set that aside. There are people out there who believe that property investment's wrong, by the way, and everybody should have a right to buy a house, and there should be no property investors. And there's some who possibly believe that property investors are not so nice people who make loads of money driving around in red Ferraris or yellow Lamborghinis and that type of stuff, and they're all very, very rich and wealthy. What are your comments towards that?
I would say I would disagree. I agree that everyone should be able to buy their own home, but I also think that as much of a nice idea as that is, to a certain degree, and this might upset a few people, but you've got to live in the real world. You've got to live in the world in which we have. And the world we have is that in the last, since the, I think, 1800s, on average, house prices have doubled every 7 to 10 years. Now, I don't know about you, but my wages haven't doubled every 7 to 10 years.
I'll speak to your boss, shall I?
Yeah, you do that. Have a word with him.
I'll tell her.
But that's if that's been true since for the last however long.
Yeah, there's a cycle, isn't there? And through that cycle,
yeah.
but it's 10 years over, there's 15, 20 years, but
Yeah, but realistically,
trend.
You go back to the 1960s, 1970s, house prices were on average 10 times someone's salary, maybe 15 times someone's salary. Nowadays, the house prices are
there's a much bigger gap.
Bigger gap between the two, and the value of houses keeps going up. But so
you think property investors are pretty nice, decent people, not driving around in red Ferraris or yellow Lamborghinis, and not money grabbing so and so's?
I think there are all types of people in all businesses, and to blanket brush people is never an appropriate way to deal with what you believe them to be like.
So if someone has hang-ups, thinking if I become a property investor, people are going to paint or generalize and label me in that way, they should have nothing to worry about, because how people perceive them to be and how they really are two different things.
Absolutely. But also, I think there are a lot of accidental landlords out there.
Oh, many, yeah, you're right.
And these are people who have either inherited a property, or it's been passed down, or they've moved out of theirs and decided to suddenly keep it. And these people, they own maybe 1 or 2 properties, maybe a stretch 3, and they're not making millions of pounds a month out of making people poorer whilst they get richer. That's not what they're doing. They just happen to be in possession of a second property, so they did what most people would do and decided that, well, it's already paid for, I may as well make money from it.
So what you're saying is it's a business, first of all. So people should
absolutely
see it as a business, and then it's a necessary business because lots of people can't afford to buy a house. So they are supplying something for which there is demand, and they shouldn't have a hang-up about that, as long as obviously they're being reasonable, just looking after their tenants, making sure they've got all the equipment,
making sure all the repairs are done, and making sure everything,
the insurance is in place, everything's been serviced, the EPCs, all that's been done, the boilers has a proper certification, so everything's legal and compliant.
Oh, absolutely. But
every landlord I've met so far over the last 23 years wants to do that, by the way.
Well, I mean, the key word there is legal, and unless you want to fall foul of the law, which
is a bad idea,
whatever way you cut it, then you've got a duty of care to your tenants overall from a certain point of view. And if every landlord out there sold their properties tomorrow, for example, how many people would become homeless overnight? And the funny thing about that is there are some people that would go, yep, every landlord should sell up so that everyone can buy. The landlords don't set the price of the property. The market does. Yeah. And realistically, if every landlord sold the properties, there would be, for a start, because of the amount of sales going through, a massive spike, because that's the way economics works, a massive spike in the prices. So prices would be driven up by those sales. making it even harder for people who already can't afford to buy their own home to buy their own home. And then what? Then you've got more homeless people, less businesses about.
Less tax being paid.
Less tax being paid. Yeah. At no point in that scenario is it a good thing. But I mean, yes, there are people out there making, multiple millions of pounds out of property, and I applaud them. There is, as long as, like you say, they are good, just, honest, legal, looking after their tenants.
Just like any other business.
Just like any other business. You're not going to turn around and say, for example, I think all shop owners should shut up shop because they're making money on my purchases. Well,
for food that I can't afford to buy because all of my bills have gone up, so deciding between heating and eating, okay, which is obviously a difficult time for people right now. And
absolutely,
as you know, we both sympathise with that and we try and support them as best
as we can.
But you've got to look at the reasoning behind, okay, the symptoms as opposed to, okay, the end user or the end service provider or the goods provider. Yeah,
because you can't, like you say, if
cause and effect, isn't it?
Yeah, causality. Yeah. Love that word. But if you look at just the end product and have a singular view, and it goes back to what we were talking about last week about mindset. If you've got a singular view on one thing and you're not open to change, you're not open to learning.
One-dimensional.
It's very one-dimensional, and you go down a very single-minded track, which doesn't benefit anyone. But you need to be open to the scope of what things are possible. And I mean, as we go through some of these different strategies, people will see that not all of them involve a direct link to a consumer, for example.
Yep. So they've bought the property, they've gone to a lender because they didn't have the cash. Lender gives them, say, 75%. They buy the house. Then they're thinking, okay, how do I find a tenant now? So what are their options there?
It depends on how much legwork they want to do themselves.
They're busy, they've got a job, they're working as a full-time professional. They're an IFA, so they've got their own practice, advising people on financial matters, so they haven't got much time.
Then I would say you probably want to go into a local agent, someone that's local to you, someone that knows the area, someone that knows the tenants, the sort of tenants that you're hoping to attract, and have a conversation with them and perhaps pay them to do their job.
Yep.
And they will do their job and find you tenants. In some scenarios, some will even pay you for voids if you give them license over it for a period of time.
So guaranteed rent.
Guaranteed rent, which
comes at a cost in a way. Yeah.
It does come at a cost.
But it's peace of mind and confidence and certainty.
But that's like I personally have always gone for fixed bills if I can, and over the last year, that has worked out well for me because obviously with the economic crisis that has happened, my bills are fixed. Whereas other people who have gone for variable because it was cheaper in the short run didn't know everything was going to happen with
swings and roundabouts.
It is swings and roundabouts. Yeah. I might pay slightly more.
You can't beat the system, mate. That's what it is at the end.
Yeah, but overall, you can't beat the system.
The system sits in a particular way once you look at it, which we might talk about one day, which will be an interesting conversation, by the way. Okay.
Ultimately,
we've got to go into the world of conspiracy theories, by the way.
But ultimately, you've got to play within the system. You can't game the system and you can't win the system.
Learn the rules and then learn to apply them in a better way than most of the people.
Yeah, so absolutely.
Then they go to a letting agent and agree a figure for the rent, and then they market it for them, and then they charge a fee. And then is it all fine and dandy, or is there anything else they need to be aware of or keep an eye on a regular basis?
At that point, you need to start looking at how much you're going to make in a year from this property, because tax rules still apply. As you are all too aware, you've still got to pay tax, and you've still got to cover any costs that come out from that.
So looking at that,
if you're, depending on what you're, take your example, you've got a busy IFA,
high rate taxpayer,
let's say
$80,000 a year. should they be buying the property in their own name or a limited company, or is that something you want me to cover?
I was just about to get onto that. And later on, we'll cover what business structure to have. Because, as we've said already, when you're getting into the world of property investment, understand that it is a business. It is a business like anything else. And so business rules apply. So take the emotion out of it, take your personal... Because a lot of people, their heart rules their head. And when it comes to business, the head has to rule. The head has to be in charge, because if you start making emotional, rash decisions based on how you feel at the time, you're going to make mistakes.
So back to traditional buy-to-lets, Kieran. They've bought the property, it's on rent through an agent, they're covering their costs. A lot of people out there think, well, I'm not making any profit every month or year, so that's fine, because like you said earlier in the first half of the show, the property is going to increase in value or double in value over the next 15, 20 years. So I'm going to double my money, and that's where I should be. Is that the right way of thinking, or do you think they should be thinking of something differently?
Personally, for me, I think the capital appreciation, which is what you're just talking about there, where the house price doubles over time, it's a nice bonus. But I don't think it's a reason to be in property or a reason to buy a property. I think that you need to look at cash flow. And I think cash flow is king. Cash flow will help you alleviate all other issues that you might have with the property, over and above all else. I think that as a business, as you run it as a business, you don't run any other business with the idea that over time the business might appreciate in value. Because bear in mind that as much as statistically house prices have doubled every 7 to 10 years, maybe 15 at a push, house prices also go down in value during economic hard times. And there is a very real chance that at some point you may be in what's called negative equity. And if you've bought a property with very poor cash flow, that then because of the poor cash flow, because of an economic downturn, all your tenants move out and you can't re-rent it, suddenly you've got to sell it. You're selling with negative equity, you're making a loss. But you bought that property based on capital appreciation. That's a bad place to be in for anyone, whether it's your own home or whether it's an investment property. But if you've got good cash flowing properties and we go into everything goes down, everything loses value, the house becomes negative equity, but it's good cash flowing, you don't need to sell it because the cash flow covers it. And that cash flow covers it until the markets recover, everything goes up, and you can hold on to it. It's a bit like a bad haircut. If you can hold on to it for long enough, it will grow out.
You are the master of that, aren't you?
I am.
You've got plenty of experience.
Absolutely. And I think that's something that people should be aware of is, using our earlier example of, if you're making £50 a month, it's £50 a month more than you were making before, but that's not good cash flow.
It's not worth the hassle, is it?
No, there's a lot.
Let's be honest about it.
Yeah.
Yeah. So they've got to make sure
and
that
ultimately,
there's enough cash flow there.
How much is your time worth?
Yeah. And then you've got 25% stuck in a property. So the return on investment you need to work out. So obviously there's your rental yield, which you need to be looking at, and then there's your return on investment. Okay,
and
return on capital employed, which are these
are things we'll cover,
which we're going to cover in due course. Plenty of stuff to cover over the coming years. Yeah.
Oh, there is years worth of content.
Yeah, plenty of years. Yeah, that's right. So that's buy to let. Now somebody becomes more sophisticated. We'll stick with our same example. We have an IFA.
Yep.
And they are busy working in their practice. They buy a couple of buy to lets, saying this is okay, but the return isn't fantastic. What else can I do? So what's a genuine or general common next step from moving on from a single buy-to-let?
So if you started off with a single buy-to-let that is, say, a 1 or 2 bedroom property, and then you utilise a little more cash, a little more finance, potentially, and you end up with a 4 or 5 bedroom property, you can split that property down into what's called a HMO, house in multiple occupancy. So rather than having one family live there with one rent coming in, you have 3, 4, 5 individuals each occupying a room and sharing central facilities like the kitchen, main bathroom, within the property,
and the
living room, and then each of them is paying an individual rent, whereas before you were getting one rent from one family, might be slightly higher, but if you then reduce the rent by a small amount but multiply it by 5, suddenly you can see how the cash flow on that goes up dramatically very, very quickly, and it scales very, very quickly.
HMOs are meant to be a headache, aren't they? If you read stuff or talk to people, there are lots of people, parking issues, antisocial behaviour. Some neighbourhoods don't like it. Some neighbourhoods have too many HMOs. It seems like a lot of headache and trouble, Kieran, doesn't it?
It can be. Again, it depends on how you approach your business. If you've got so the scenario you were just talking about, antisocial behaviour, too many. Well, that's one example. What about if you have a HMO near a university? So you've got students. You've got many students coming in, and students is a separate one that we'll cover again later, but it's just as an overall here. So suddenly you've got or professionals that travel a lot,
or nurses, or doctors who tend to
travel a lot around, or need a period where they just don't want to be on their own. They don't want to rent by themselves, and professionals generally don't have that same stigma, do they?
Mm-hmm. So I think be clear on your demographic and the type of person.
Be clear on who you want to rent out to. Be clear on your customer.
So if you wanted nurses or doctors, maybe get a good, decent property near a hospital, possibly.
Possibly, yeah.
Just as an example.
Just an example,
or near the main train station, so people can commute.
Commuters,
in and out of a particular place, depending on where it is.
And that's the other thing is knowing your customer base, knowing who you want to rent out to, but also, every business has its ups and downs. Every business has its headaches, and rules that they need to follow. Are there issues with parking in certain areas? Yes, there are, but those are parking issues whether or not you're single let, whether you own, whether you're HMO. That's just a generic issue for certain areas. Doesn't matter whether it's a HMO or not. It's an issue. So you can't overcome all issues, but what you can do is you can look at the areas in which you're looking to invest. And so when you're looking at the areas to invest, you look at, you make that decision based on what you want. If you've got, like say, you want to rent out to commuters, you're not so worried about parking per se, because you're close to the train station. They're going to leave the house, go to the train station, get on a train, go to wherever it is they need to go to earn their money, then come back.
Have a bit of food, watch a bit of TV, read a book, and go to bed.
Absolutely. And there's less having poor parking in an area like that is less impactful. Whereas if you've got somewhere that's in a beautiful location, with lots of greenery around, but it's kind of in the middle of nowhere, well, parking's more of an issue there because people need to be able to drive to get to and from it.
So before we get more into HMOs and cash flowing and why it could work better from a return on investment point of view, we have a question from Jordan Ola. So thank you, Jordan, for asking a question on
Thank
YouTube.
you very much.
And Jordan is asking, what is the ideal startup amount to get on the property ladder?
On the property ladder in general, or on the property investment ladder?
Let's assume, first of all, investment, because we're talking about investment, and then we talk about buying their own home, for example.
So classic answer, it depends. It depends on what property strategy you want to follow. It depends on how
for now
big you want to grow, and how fast you want to do it. If you're going for single lets will then, what demographic are you aiming at? What areas are you looking at? There's a terminology called gold mine area, which we will discuss on another show, the exact details of how that works.
You're such a tease, aren't you, Kieran? You're teasing us so much about forthcoming shows.
I know. But
you've done this before, haven't you?
Once or twice.
Okay.
But I mean, as a weekly show, we've got to
keep everybody engaged,
keep everyone on their toes.
Yeah.
So, in a nutshell, though, without going too deep into it, gold mine area is an area you pick that you feel has a good return for you, that works well for you and your demographic and your business. So, if we're gonna, you find your gold mine area, and then what your clients are going to look like, what your tenants are going to look like, what sort of people are they? Are you going to be renting out to students, professionals, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera? And from then you can then look at those areas, find the average value of a property within that area. So say the average value of a property is £200,000, for example, and so you will need 25% of that as a first deposit if you're going to go down the mortgage route, which is one option, or you are going to need something else that we'll get onto later, a partner, someone to go in with to fund it.
So what Jordan could do is, let's say the average price of a house in Peterborough, and I assume, Jordan, you're in Peterborough, forgive me if you're not, I'm just going to pick a place, so we might as well pick Peterborough because we're here. So let's say the average price is £200,000, just for example. I'm not saying it is. So if Jordan's looking to buy that property, he needs a 25% deposit, so he needs £50,000 plus all the
legal fees and costs,
SDLT, etc.,
all the rest of it. Yeah.
Or what he could do is find a friend, family member, or an investor, and say, "Let's go
pull their money together."
Pay 25. They pay 25,000, and Jordan pays 25,000, so 50-50 each.
Yep.
Or he could say, "You put all the money in. I'll manage the property. You don't need an agent." And then we can do some interesting stuff, which I'm not going to go into right now. But
no, because we've got that coming up later.
About that, but let's do a flip or a conversion or something else, which could work. So the point you're making to Jordan is, you don't need all the money yourself. There are people who are cash rich and time poor. So
if you're time rich and cash poor,
you can do that. So that's one option. And the other option, of course, is if you're looking to buy a property for himself, then he can put down a very low deposit of 5%, and use the government's first-time buyer
incentive,
and then basically that helps him get on the property ladder. But then he's got to make sure he can afford the repayments.
Yeah.
He's got to have a decent income coming in to do that. But I'm going to assume Jordan's talking about property investing and investment. Okay, that's what we're talking about. So Jordan, even if you haven't got all the cash, by the way, don't worry about it. We are going to share with you ways where you can raise the cash and get it onto the property ladder without using your own money, which generally speaking, most people know as no money down, which is my most favourite strategy, by the way, if anybody's interested.
We'll cover that another day.
We're going to cover that another day.
Because we don't have, isn't it? We don't have time for that today. I promise you that. Because once Shaz gets started on that subject, well...
Maybe for the next 18 episodes, we're talking about no money down.
I mean, I'll be quiet for the next 6 hours.
You can just listen and observe.
Exactly that.
So HMOs, generally speaking, they require more effort.
They do require more effort.
They require better management, because you've got to be conscious of the neighbours and make sure that they're looking after the property and looking after the neighbours, because some neighbours, rightly so, by the way, can get annoyed because they think one day Bob's in there, next day
Jeff,
Deepak's
Fred.
in there, then Sandy's in there, then Syra's in there, and then Simon's in there. I don't know my neighbours anymore.
Yeah, absolutely.
And some people are terrified by that, and understandably.
It is understandable, but I think if it's well maintained, well managed, and compared to traditional buy-to-let, single buy-to-let, it is more work, it is more effort, more involvement on your behalf. But
it gets people in a property ladder who can't afford to pay, say, £800
exactly
for, let's say, a 2-bedroom flat, or £1,000 for a house, 3-bedroom house. So they can just pay £100 or £125 a room. Get them somewhere to stay, doesn't it?
Exactly that. So if you take your example, you've found yourself a 5-6 bedroom property that you've divided into a HMO. You've got to follow all the compliance rules and laws, and there's a whole deep dive we could do on that. But you make sure you are compliant is the key message there. and do your own research. Make sure you've done your due diligence on what those rules are, because they do change, they do get updated. But once you've done all of that, you've got your property there, and rather than renting that out to, say, a large family for, hypothetically, let's call it, £1,500 a month, you could rent it out to 5 individuals for £500 a month each, and that gives you £2,500 a month.
So better cash flow.
So it's a better cash flowing, more return,
which works well.
Exactly that.
People need to be mindful of the regulations. There's more compliance work,
absolutely,
fire risk assessments, etc. that they've got to observe. And then obviously Article 4 is in a particular area, which means they can't have an HMO unless they go through the planning process, so they need to be aware of that. So don't go buying a property in a particular area where you're not sure an HMO can be started up because it's got Article 4 direction. So again,
so I mean, something to be very, very clear on is that you can't just buy a house with multiple bedrooms and put multiple people in there. That's not a HMO. That's in breach of a lot. So you need to make sure that it is compliant. So, and do the work. But like with most things, the harder the more work you put in, the more return you get.
But if managed properly, conscious of the neighbours or everything else, okay, and try and keep people there as long as you can to go by looking after them. An HMO is, as you know, it's not my preferred strategy, and I don't do HMOs, as you know, Kieran, at all, for different reasons. But it's something that people can make it work really well.
They really can.
It's a good option.
It is, and something else to be aware of is that whilst it is higher yields than your average single let, it is more intensive management. There are more regulations, and it can be harder to find the right product to finance it. It's just something to be aware of that has come up in a couple of times in the research.
And funding works different because
funding works slightly differently. Because
the right size of HMO, then they'll base it on the rental income as opposed to just bricks and mortar. They're valuing it more as a business. So that kind of works well as well, doesn't it? Yeah,
absolutely. Okay. And like I say, be aware that what you are running is a business.
Yeah, absolutely. So we've done HMOs for now, just to give people an insight. Do you want to share another property strategy which people will find interesting? I know you got purpose-built student accommodation there. So let's skip that. Because we'll link that with the University of Peterborough and what's going on in Peterborough, by the way, as an opportunity for people. Is there anything else that you can think of there that you want to bring on board and share with us, which might be quite interesting for people that they haven't come across before? So how about something else, Kieran?
So another option is something called serviced accommodation.
What's that?
Serviced accommodation, it's a bit like it's a furnished holiday let. It's like a bed and breakfast if done right.
So the kind of place you'd expect if you go to Cornwall or Dorset or Cumbria,
potentially,
or Blackpool, or wherever people want to go to.
Potentially, yes. And you know this better than I do, but depending on whether it's, and this is something that people do need to be aware of, is furnished holiday let or serviced accommodation. They are two subtly different things. They are two sides of a coin, if you will, about renting out to individuals over a short period of time, but one has slightly different rules to the other.
So in a nutshell, what you're saying is this is like a hotel or a bed and breakfast as opposed to being a short hold tenancy.
Absolutely, yeah. So offering services like, breakfast, and use of a hot tub, for example, just picking something out for now. Swimming pool or
barbecue facilities or a creche or something else that you might have. But if somebody hasn't got any of those and they've just got rooms that they want to rent out, does service accommodation work for that?
Furnished holiday let.
Okay.
And I'm not going to go into the rules of that. That's, again, part of your own due diligence. But in short, people, holiday makers will go for a short period of time, 5, maybe 2 weeks, maybe a week, just to get away, have fun, do what it is they want to do on holiday, enjoy themselves. And as long as you keep that going and in certain areas you can keep that going year round. In other areas it's seasonal, so that's something that you need to look into.
So how is service accommodation different to an HMO, for example?
So generally you will rent your room out to individuals on a case-by-case basis.
And how do you rent them out? Do they put a big board outside? Or do they have a website? Or how does it work?
You can go on
Booking.com
and places like that. Airbnb to rent it out. So if you live or have a property within, high party areas, then tourism comes through.
Builders, that type of stuff. Okay.
Builders and contractors depends on how long they're staying for. As a general rule, it's again something to be aware of.
Yep.
You don't want them in there too long because then it stops being service accommodation or furnished holiday let.
You might have an issue with VAT because with HMOs and singlets, obviously there's no VAT because it's
exempt supply.
Service accommodation, once you go over £83,000 a year, you've then got to charge VAT, although the price has to be VAT inclusive. So that's something people need to be mindful of.
Because this is not an investment business; it's trading business.
Treated as a trading business, you're
treated,
right.
Yeah.
And then in terms of HMOs or singlets, like we said earlier, with our example of the IFA, if they're a high rate taxpayer, they can't claim all the interest finance costs. Okay, so they can claim half of them, or they get it through a tax credit without going too technical.
Too technical.
With service accommodation, can they claim all the interest costs? But that's something that you need me to talk about.
That's something that you are more experienced with than I am.
So if people have a service accommodation business or they meet the rules of a furnished holiday let, they claim all their interest costs, which is a good addition, by the way, because obviously you can't do that as a higher rate taxpayer in a single let or an HMO. Now, of course, if you have a limited company, then Section 24, finance costs aren't affected, so you're okay. But this is just if your property's in your own name, you're affected by Section 24. And by own name, I mean you as an individual, or where two or more of you own a property either jointly or as a partnership. So that's what people need to be aware of, because that means you got to pay extra tax if Section 24 affects you. So you need to be mindful of that.
Absolutely.
The other benefit of obviously service accommodation, Kieran, is cash flow is better.
Yep.
If you've got it in the right area, because you're charging by the room now. So using the earlier example, where you've got a house where you're charging £1,000 a month. If it's an HMO, let's use your example, you might be saying £2,000 because you've got 4 rooms, you're charging £500 per room, for example.
Yep.
And with service accommodation, you can be charging let's say £100 a night. And if you've got 3 or 4 bedrooms there, you charge just £400 per night. And that's not going to be 100% occupancy, and it usually isn't unless you're in a very, very, very popular area at a very, very popular seasonal time. But let's just say it's not going to happen. But the numbers soon add up as long as you've got the right property in the right area
with the right marketing.
Market.
Yeah, absolutely.
So you've got that. Then if somebody wants to make pension payments, then they can make that the income that is generated from an FHL or SA service accommodation qualifies for pension payments. So they've got that on top. Then you've got capital allowances that they can claim, which is basically is the money that they spend on the refurb, or if they bought the property, any capital equipment in there, plant and machinery, could qualify for capital allowances. That's going to have to significantly reduce their taxes going forward, which again can be pretty much a game changer. And then with
a huge game changer. And at some point we'll go through that again.
Absolutely, in the future. And then of course with service accommodation, you've got 2 options. You can either be hands-on and do it yourself, or you can give it to an agent who'll charge you. Some may charge you 10%, some 12, 15, 18% to manage that property for you. And then obviously you've got items like you've got to change the bed linen regularly, the cleaning and all that kind of stuff, because you've got new people coming in, they want their bed made and everything available.
So there are added costs to it, rather than your standard buy-to-let. Someone moves in, then they're responsible for cleaning it. Yeah. With a serviced accommodation, you are more responsible in that sense. So there is that added cost. But as you say, the added cash flow offsets that massively.
Thanks for listening to Wealth Made Simple. You can follow and contact Shaz on the Facebook pages Entrust Property Tax and The Profits Wizard. You can also find Shaz on LinkedIn, YouTube and Instagram. Alternatively, email him at shaz@aa-accountants.co.uk. Build your wealth by mastering money.